The sun was setting over the land of Egypt, and the sky was painted in shades of orange and deep purple. In a small mud brick house in the Hebrew quarter, a young mother named Jochebed sat rocking her newborn son. Her hands were trembling, not from the cool evening breeze that drifted through the window, but from the fear that gripped her heart like iron chains. 3 months had passed since she gave birth to this beautiful baby boy. 3 months of hiding him. 3 months of muffling his cries. 3 months of living in constant terror that someone would discover her secret. You see, Pharaoh had given a horrible command. Every Hebrew baby boy was to be thrown into the Nile River. The Egyptian king feared that the Hebrew people were becoming too numerous and too strong, so he decided to destroy them before they could rise up against him. Can you imagine that kind of fear? Being a mother and knowing that the government wants to kill your child simply because of who you are. Jochebed would nurse her son in the darkest hours of the night. She would sing to him in whispers so soft that even the walls couldn't hear. Her older children, Miriam and Aaron, would take turns watching by the door, ready to warn her if the Egyptian soldiers came near. But babies grow, and as they grow, they cry louder. They need more. They become harder to hide. Jochebed knew that time was running out. Every day brought new danger. Every sound outside made her heart stop. She couldn't bear the thought of soldiers ripping her son from her arms. She couldn't survive watching them throw her precious baby into the crocodile-infested waters of the Nile. So she made a decision that would break her heart, but might save her son's life. She would put him in God's hands completely. For days, Jochebed worked on her plan. Her fingers moved quickly as she gathered papyrus reeds from the riverbank. The same reeds that grew along the Nile where Hebrew baby boys were being murdered. She would use these reeds to save her son. How ironic that felt. How beautifully ironic. She wove the reeds together carefully, creating a small basket that was watertight and sturdy. Her daughter Miriam sat beside her, asking questions. "Mother, what are you making?" "A little ark, my dear," Jochebed replied. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were filled with tears that she refused to let fall. "An ark," Miriam repeated, "like the one that saved Noah from the flood." "Yes, sweetheart," Jochebed whispered. "I'm making an ark to save our little one from the flood of evil that has covered this land." She coated the basket with tar and pitch, making sure that not a single drop of water could seep through. Every movement was a prayer. Every stroke of the tar was a plea to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. "Please protect my son. Please watch over him. Please give him a future and a hope." Aaron, her older son, watched from the corner. He was young, but he understood what was happening. He understood that his baby brother was about to be taken away. "Will we ever see him again?" Aaron asked. The question hung in the air like smoke. Jochebed stopped her work and looked at her son. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I know that God sees him and God loves him. And sometimes we have to trust God with the things we love most, even when we can't see the path ahead." The basket was finally finished. It was small and simple, but it was made with more love than any royal cradle could ever hold. Jochebed lined it with soft cloth. She wanted her baby to be comfortable, even if he was floating away from her. The morning came too quickly. Jochebed barely slept. She spent the whole night holding her baby boy, memorizing every feature of his face, the way his tiny fingers curled around hers, the soft sound of his breathing, the warmth of his body against her chest. She sang to him one last time, a song about God's faithfulness, about how he had protected their ancestors, about how he would never leave them or forsake them. Her voice cracked on the words, but she kept singing. When the first light of dawn touched the sky, she knew it was time. She placed her son gently in the basket. He looked up at her with those innocent eyes, eyes that had no idea what was about to happen, eyes that trusted her completely. "Go with God, my precious one," she whispered. Then she kissed his forehead and closed the lid. Miriam walked beside her mother as they made their way to the Nile. The river was quiet at this early hour. The water moved slowly, reflecting the pink and gold of the sunrise. Jochebed knelt by the water's edge. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the basket. This was the hardest thing she had ever done. Harder than childbirth, harder than slavery, harder than anything she could imagine. She was about to let go of her son, to release him into the unknown, to trust that somehow, someway God would protect him. She lowered the basket into the water. It floated perfectly, just as she had designed it. The current began to pull it gently downstream, moving it away from her, away from everything familiar, away from her love and her protection. Jochebed stood there watching until she couldn't see the basket anymore. Then she collapsed on the riverbank and wept. She wept for the child she was losing. She wept for all the Hebrew mothers who had lost their sons. She wept for the cruelty of the world. But somewhere deep in her heart, beneath all that pain, there was a tiny flame of hope. A hope that whispered, God is not finished with your son yet. Miriam didn't go home. Her mother had told her to follow the basket, to watch where it went, to see what would happen. So the young girl walked along the riverbank, staying hidden among the tall reeds and papyrus plants. Her heart was pounding. What if the basket tipped over? What if a crocodile attacked it? What if her baby brother drowned? She pushed those thoughts away and kept walking, kept watching, kept praying. The basket drifted slowly downstream. It bobbed gently on the water, moving past fishing boats and reed beds, moving toward the part of the river where the Egyptian royalty came to bathe. Miriam's eyes widened. She knew who bathed in that part of the river, Pharaoh's daughter, the princess of Egypt. What would happen if the princess found the basket? Would she follow her father's cruel law and have the baby killed? Or would something else happen? Something unexpected. Miriam crouched lower in the reeds. She could see the princess and her attendants approaching the river. They were laughing and talking, completely unaware of the tiny basket floating toward them. The princess was beautiful. She wore fine linen and jewelry that sparkled in the sunlight. Her servants carried towels and perfumes. Everything about her spoke of wealth and privilege. And then it happened. One of the servant girls spotted the basket. She pointed and said something to the princess. The princess's eyes locked onto the small reed vessel floating among the papyrus plants. She gestured for one of her servants to retrieve it. Miriam held her breath. The servant girl waded into the water and pulled the basket to shore. The princess knelt down and opened it. And at that exact moment, the baby began to cry. Not a soft whimper, but a loud, healthy cry that echoed across the water. Miriam watched as the princess's face changed. First surprise, then recognition. The princess knew this was a Hebrew baby. She knew her father's law. But as she looked down at the crying infant, something shifted in her expression. Her eyes softened, her lips curved into a gentle smile. She reached down and picked up the baby. And in that moment, everything changed. The princess held the baby close. His cries were piercing, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she rocked him gently, speaking soft words in Egyptian. "Shh, little one," she cooed. "You're safe now." Her attendants looked at each other nervously. They knew whose baby this must be. They knew the law, but they also knew their princess, and they could see that she had already made up her mind. "This is one of the Hebrew babies," the princess said, not as a question, but as a statement. She wasn't naive. She understood exactly what she had found. A Hebrew mother had tried to save her son by putting him in the river, by obeying the letter of Pharaoh's law while defying its spirit. And the princess respected that courage, that clever, desperate, beautiful courage. She looked down at the baby's face. His skin was soft and perfect. His eyes were squeezed shut as he cried. His little fists waved in the air. How could anyone want to kill something so innocent? How could her father order the death of babies like this? In that moment, The princess made a decision that would change the course of history. "I'm going to keep him," she declared. Her servants gasped. "But princess," one of them began, "your father's law." "My father's law says Hebrew boys must be thrown into the Nile." The princess interrupted. "This boy was in the Nile, and I found him, and now he is mine." She smiled at her own logic. "I will call him Moses," she continued, "because I drew him out of the water." The baby was still crying, still hungry, still needing his mother's milk. The princess looked around helplessly. She had no idea how to feed a baby. She had no idea how to care for an infant. And that's when Miriam saw her opportunity. The brave young girl stepped out from the reeds. Her heart was racing. She was just a Hebrew slave girl. The princess could have her punished for approaching without permission. But Miriam had to try. She had to save her brother. "Excuse me, princess," Miriam said. Her voice was trembling but clear. The princess turned, surprised, to see a young Hebrew girl standing there. "Should I go and find a Hebrew woman to nurse the baby for you?" Miriam asked. The question was brilliant, perfectly innocent, perfectly practical. The princess smiled. "Yes," she said. "Go and find a nurse for him." Miriam ran. She ran faster than she had ever run before. Her feet flew over the ground. Her heart soared with joy. God had done the impossible. Not only was her brother alive, but he was now under the protection of Pharaoh's daughter, and she was about to bring her mother back to him. Jochebed was sitting in her house. Her face was buried in her hands. She couldn't stop crying. Her arms felt empty, her heart felt broken, and then the door burst open. Miriam ran in breathless and excited. "Mother," she gasped. "Mother, come quickly." Jochebed looked up. Her eyes were red and swollen. "What is it?" she asked wearily. "The princess found him," Miriam said. "Pharaoh's daughter found the basket, and she wants to keep him, and she needs a nurse. And she told me to find someone, and Mother, you have to come." The words tumbled out so fast that Jochebed could barely understand them. But slowly, very slowly, the meaning sank in. Her son was alive. The princess had found him. The princess wanted to keep him, and the princess needed someone to nurse him. Jochebed stood up. Her legs were shaking. Was this real? Was this actually happening? She followed Miriam out of the house. They walked quickly through the Hebrew quarter, past the mud brick homes and the narrow streets, toward the river where the Egyptian princess waited. When Jochebed arrived, she saw her baby, her son, alive and well in the arms of Pharaoh's daughter. The princess looked at Jochebed. "Can you nurse this child for me?" the princess asked. Jochebed nodded. She didn't trust herself to speak. If she opened her mouth, she might sob. She might laugh. She might give away the truth. "I will pay you for your services." The princess continued. "Take this child and nurse him for me, and when he is old enough, bring him to the palace, and he will be my son." Jochebed reached out and took her baby. Her arms were full again. Her heart was whole again. She looked down at his precious face, and tears streamed down her cheeks. But these were different tears. These were tears of joy, of relief, of overwhelming gratitude. God had heard her prayers. God had seen her desperation. God had done the impossible. Her son would live. Not just live, but thrive. He would grow up in Pharaoh's palace. He would receive the best education in Egypt. He would be protected and provided for. And for now, for these precious early years, he would be with her. She could nurse him and hold him and teach him about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. She could tell him who he really was, where he came from, whose son he truly was. "Thank you, princess," Jochebed whispered. The princess smiled. She had no idea that she was looking at the baby's real mother. She had no idea that she had just reunited a family. She had no idea that this baby would one day lead his people out of slavery. But God knew. God had orchestrated every detail. From the moment Jochebed wove that basket to the exact second the princess opened it, every moment had been guided by his hand. Years passed, like water flowing down the Nile. Moses grew from a baby into a curious, energetic boy. For the first few years of his life, he lived with Jochebed. She treasured every single moment. Every morning she would wake him with songs about the God of their fathers. She would tell him stories while she fed him, stories about Abraham, who trusted God enough to leave everything behind, stories about Isaac, who was also a miracle baby, stories about Jacob, who wrestled with God and wouldn't let go until he received a blessing. Stories about Joseph, who was sold into slavery but became second in command of all Egypt. "You are a Hebrew," she would whisper to him at night. "Never forget that no matter where you go or what you become, you are one of God's chosen people." Moses didn't fully understand what that meant. He was too young, but the words sank deep into his heart, like seeds planted in fertile soil. Jochebed taught him the language of their people. She taught him their customs and their prayers. She taught him that the God of the Hebrews was the one true God, the God who sees, the God who hears, the God who remembers his promises. And then the day came that Jochebed had been dreading, the day she had to bring Moses to the palace. He was old enough now to be weaned, old enough to leave his mother. The princess had been patient, but now she wanted her adopted son. Jochebed dressed Moses in his best clothes. She braided his hair carefully. She held him one last time. "Remember who you are," she whispered in his ear. "Remember the God of your fathers, and remember that he has a purpose for your life." Then she walked him to the palace. The palace was more magnificent than anything Moses had ever seen. Massive stone columns reached toward the sky. Golden statues gleamed in the sunlight. Gardens filled with exotic flowers and trees spread out in every direction. Servants rushed back and forth carrying trays and baskets. Everything was beautiful and impressive and overwhelming. The princess was waiting for them. When she saw Moses, her face lit up with joy. "My son," she said, reaching out her arms. Moses looked back at Jochebed. He didn't want to leave her, but Jochebed gently pushed him forward. "Go," she said softly. "This is where you belong now." Moses went to the princess, and Jochebed turned and walked away. Every step felt like her heart was breaking all over again, but she knew this was God's plan. She had to trust him. Inside the palace, Moses was given everything a prince could want: fine clothes and expensive toys, teachers who educated him in reading and writing and mathematics, servants who attended to his every need. He learned the language of the Egyptians. He learned their history and their customs. He studied their architecture and their military strategies. He became fluent in the wisdom of Egypt, which was considered the greatest wisdom in the world at that time. But late at night, when he was alone, Moses would remember his mother's words. "Remember who you are." He would remember the songs she sang, the stories she told, the God she worshipped, and he felt torn between two worlds. He lived in luxury while his people suffered in slavery. He was called an Egyptian prince, but he knew he was a Hebrew. He had everything, but something inside him felt empty, restless, like he was waiting for something, preparing for something. He didn't know what, not yet, but deep in his heart, he knew that his life had a purpose beyond the palace walls, a purpose that was bigger than comfort and privilege, a purpose that was connected to the God his mother had taught him about, the God who had saved him from the Nile. Moses grew into a strong young man. He was educated in all the wisdom of Egypt. He became powerful in speech and in action. The Egyptians respected him. Some even feared him. He could have had anything he wanted: power, wealth, a comfortable life free from struggle. But something happened when Moses was 40 years old. Something that changed everything. He went out to where his people, the Hebrews, were working. He saw them laboring under the hot Egyptian sun, making bricks without straw, being beaten by cruel taskmasters. crying out in pain and exhaustion, and something inside him snapped. These were his people, his brothers and sisters. They were suffering while he lived in comfort. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave, beating him mercilessly, and Moses couldn't stand by and watch. He looked around to make sure no one was watching. Then he killed the Egyptian and hid his body in the sand. The next day, Moses went out again. This time, he saw two Hebrews fighting each other. He tried to break up the fight. "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" he asked the one who was in the wrong. But the man turned on him. "Who made you ruler and judge over us?" The man sneered. "Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Moses was terrified. His secret was out. People knew what he had done, and sure enough, when Pharaoh heard about it, he tried to kill Moses. So Moses ran. He fled from Egypt into the desert, into the land of Midian. He went from being a prince to being a fugitive, from living in a palace to wandering in the wilderness. Everything he had known was gone. His identity as an Egyptian prince, his security and comfort, his future, all of it was stripped away. Moses ended up settling in Midian. He married a woman named Zipporah. He became a shepherd, taking care of his father-in-law's flocks. For 40 years, he lived in the desert. 40 years of silence. 40 years of wondering if he had made a terrible mistake. 40 years of watching sheep and thinking about his life. But those 40 years weren't wasted. God was preparing Moses, teaching him patience and humility, stripping away his pride and self-reliance, training him to depend on God alone. Moses didn't know it yet, but he was being prepared for the greatest mission any man had ever received. He was being prepared to confront Pharaoh, to demand the freedom of his people, to lead them out of slavery and into the promised land. The baby who had been saved from the Nile in a basket of reeds, the boy who grew up between two worlds, the man who had run away in failure and shame, was about to become the greatest leader Israel had ever known. Because God doesn't waste anything. Not the pain, not the waiting, not the failures, not the years that feel lost. God was weaving it all together, every thread of Moses' story. The Hebrew mother's faith, the Egyptian princess's compassion, the palace education, the desert wandering. All of it was preparing Moses for his destiny. And one day soon, Moses would stand before a burning bush, and God would call him by name. And Moses would say, "Here I am," and the greatest rescue mission in history would begin. But that night, as Moses lay under the stars in Midian, listening to the sheep settle down for sleep, he had no idea what was coming. He only knew that somehow, someway, the God his mother had taught him about, the God who had saved him from the Nile, was still watching over him, still guiding him, still preparing him for something extraordinary.